Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. We're sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and this panel will discuss DC legacy heroes. Are they assets or dead weight? And we'll start with the panelists introducing themselves and telling us who their favorite legacy hero is and why. David, you want to start?
Sure. I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder novels from Blackstone Publishing. They're urban fantasy, kind of rural fantasy, actually, about a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who has to come to Denver, make up with his estranged family, and save the world. I also have my first high fantasy, Dark Moon, Shallow Sea, coming out on Halloween 2023, which is pretty cool, and a gay, geeky rom-com called To Catch a Geek, in which I worked in as many awesome nerdy references as I could. And my favorite legacy hero is Tim Drake. I recently was on a podcast about the Red Robin run, and I just fell back in love with him and how awesome I think he is. So,
okay, Wayland.
I write under the name Wayland Smith. My most relevant publishing credit here would probably be I write the Wildside series about superhuman mercenaries. My favorite legacy hero is probably fairly easy for everyone to work out, but it is absolutely Nightwing. And I also review all the superhero TV shows and movies on a site called comicbookclog.com.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. That's Fraser. I write historical fantasy and film reference. I had a book, The Aliens Are Here, come out on Alien Visitors on Earth. It includes a chapter on Superman. That was last year. I had a steampunk novel, self-published, Questionable Minds, out last year. I blog at FraserSherman.com, and I do a lot of comic book related blogging at Atomic Junk Shop. My two favorite legacy heroes, I'm going to cheat, Wally West, because when he became the Flash, he had been Kid Flash for almost as long as Barry Allen had been the Flash, and I think he earned it more than anyone. Also, he had some amazing writers on his Flash tenure. And Zatanna, daughter of Zatara, the Golden Age magician, because she's just awesome.
Okay, and those of you who are regulars here know that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. I also write science fiction. I've been a comic books fan since I was 8. And my favorite legacy hero, if you follow me on social media, comes as no surprise, it's Nightwing. Although Wonder Girl would be a close second. Unfortunately, her life is such a mess that it's hard to make her a favorite, but that's a topic for a whole different panel. DC has an army of legacy heroes. Marvel, not so much. Why do you think that is? Wayland, will you start?
I think Marvel did a lot to get away from their Golden Age roots with most of their characters. They brought back some of the individuals like Captain America, Namor, and the original Torch. But aside from that, I think they tried to get away from a lot of the Golden Age stuff. And DC found a way to update it and bring them in. And then instead of making them all cookie cutouts, they've managed to give their sidekicks, legacies, whatever you want to call them, some actual individuality to it. Like at this point, no one in the world would think Dick Grayson and Roy Harper are the same person. So I think they've managed to get on a roll with that sort of thing.
Okay. Fraser?
I think when DC did Crisis in Infinite Earths back in the 80s, rebooted its continuity, it opened up a lot of change. Barry Allen died, Wally West came in, and then they did more changes of that sort later. Then eventually they decided, no, all the changes were wrong, let's walk them back, and then let's reboot some more, and things got messy. But the impetus was there.
Okay. David?
I think it comes out of the Teen Titans, really. For me, a lot of it is, Wayland's got a point about the Golden Age transfer when you look at Hal Jordan coming in as Green Lantern, but at the same time, you got to remember that Teen Titans was the book for so long, and so many of us when we were kids and younger, it was the most popular comic, easily, winning all the Eisners and beating X-Men. They were always kind of neck and neck for a long time. So like you mentioned, Donna, and Donna's just, she's one of my favorite. We've all kind of shared our love for Nightwing, and I think that for a lot of us, that was the team, or those were the people that kind of got us on this legacy train and popularity. I agree completely. I think Wally made a much better Flash. I didn't think you needed to bring Barry back. And And I will die angry that Alan Heinberg's Wonder Woman run, brief as it was, Donna only got to wear the Wonder Woman title for like half an issue before Diana came back. I was so excited for Donna.
Yeah, well, I think Wayland makes a really good point with Marvel making their fresh start in the 1960s, because they really kind of redid their line, except for those ones that they brought back. And I was thinking about this afternoon, and it seemed to me, and please correct me if you can think of someone else, that the most direct line, a la the Flashes and the Green Lanterns, at Marvel is Marvel and Captain Marvel Carol Danvers. But there's not a mentoring kind of relationship there like you had with Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson, Barry Allen, Wally West, eventually Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl. And so I wonder sometimes if it's just a matter of the companies took different directions and then played off the directions that they were already moving in. I mean, if you're doing fine without a bunch of legacy heroes, why would you add them?
I think another factor possibly, in the 90s, DC did a lot of legacies of the Justice, well, also even in the 80s with Infinity Inc., they gave the Justice Society kids and then proteges and made them the mentors. And Marvel, its three biggest superheroes of the Golden Age, Human Torch, Submariner, and Captain America, are all still around. And by one sleight of hand or another, they're all still in fighting trim. So no real need to pass on the legacy.
Well, I also wonder if maybe they invented Dick Grayson to encourage young boys to buy Batman.
Yeah.
And I just sort of wonder if that worked so well, they thought, aha, we can introduce a teenage boy character to sell all these others. But let's look at what actually makes a legacy hero. Fraser, how would you define a legacy hero?
For me, it's somebody who is consciously, okay, I wouldn't count Barry Allen in the Silver Age because as far as he knew at first, Jay Garrick was just a character in a comic book. There was no legacy. A legacy hero, I define it as someone who is consciously taking on the role or the responsibilities of an older hero, frequently the same name or the same powers, not always.
David?
I would agree with that. I don't think it has to be a mentor relationship, or they don't have to have a relationship per se. I think that it could be an inspiration. Cases like Ryan Choi taking over the Atom is a good example. I don't think he had ever met the previous Atom. But picking up on something you were saying there, Nancy, too, there is a marketing angle to this, but there's also a diversification. And Ryan's a great example of that. Basically this gave us a chance to add people like Jon Stewart, gave us a chance to add a Black Green Lantern, gave us a chance to add somebody Asian like Ryan, and to diversify these roles. And I think that's one of the motivators. So I like it. I like legacies a lot, but I think that's what defines a legacy for me. Is it's a little bit of a marketing thing, which again, totally pro. But also I think it's largely comes down to someone picking up the title and the spirit of the mask without it necessarily having a relationship to the original hero.
Wayland?
I don't know what I could possibly add to either of those. I think those are both great encapsulations of who they are. There's frequently a direct tie, like Bruce and Dick or Barry and Wally, but not always. And it's just someone who carries on the spirit or name or powers or all of the above for those who came before them.
Yeah, well, picking up on what David was saying about diversification, Yara Flor is Hispanic. And so we now have a Hispanic Wonder Woman. And I remember when Nubia made her first appearance, so that we had a Black Wonder Woman. And it's kind of looking like in the market, Nubia's time may have come, because that book appears to be doing pretty well. And so that's two more different kinds of Wonder Woman. But like with the Green Lanterns, I think it was David who was saying Hal Jordan isn't a direct successor of Alan, and I'm totally drawing a blank, like Fraser was saying. And And then you have the whole Green Lantern Corps. So it would be hard to call them legacy heroes because they started out, an arm of the Guardians of Oa rather than a protege or an assistant or a comrade in arms or anything like that to any of the earlier characters. So the crux of the panel is a legacy hero or character a benefit to the main character or to the story potential of the company, or are they a drag and dead weight? David, you want to start?
Yeah, I think they're a benefit, straight up. Again, I think they allow readers to see themselves in a character, especially if you diversify it, right? Like you said, Nubia's time has come, which is awesome. She's a badass. I'm glad to see her getting more time in the spotlight. It allows readers to see themselves on the page more. That brings in new readers. And you see so much of that happening right now with Son of Kal-El, with Tim Drake, right? Of these characters, again, diversification. It also can give the character a younger take to bring in younger readers, which I think is important too. John Byrne did a really interesting series at one point. I can't remember that. I think it was called Generations, where he allowed the characters to age and then their kids and their grandkids and showed, which was interesting because Bruce and Cal were both immortal essentially through various things that occurred. So they were watching these generations of heroes. I always thought that would be kind of interesting if you set some ages and allowed characters to age a bit. And there was a really good period when I was reading so much DC of Bruce and Clark were, they were like 30, and Dick and Donna and them were about mid-20s and then, or a little early 20s. And then you had the kids, the new Teen Titans. And I thought that was a perfect slice for me because I like all of those generations. I like everything they were doing. So for me as a reader, I could not get enough of DC at that time. I thought that was so. Personally, I think it's really advantageous to the company because they have different audiences, different ages. I don't think they're a dead weight at all. In fact, I'm kind of sad some of these legacies have been erased or gone back to, the older character.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that too. Wayland, what about you?
I will take the unfortunate reality-based approach of it depends entirely upon the writer. I have read some legacy sort of focus stories, which I thought were absolutely brilliant. I'm currently really enjoying the Stargirl and the Lost Children miniseries that's coming out right now, where she's looking into some of the apparently missing Golden Age sidekicks. But I've also read some of those that have been really, really horrible, and it's just a matter of a combination of the quality of the writer and sometimes the unfortunate interference from editorial. As a whole, I really enjoy them. I think they can be really well done, but there are a couple of variables in play that you can't always control.
Yeah. Fraser?
I agree with Wayland. A lot depends on the writing. Part of the reason I enjoyed Wally's time as the Flash was William Messalobes did so much fun with the series, and then Mark Waid did so many neat things with the series, and that was awesome. And there are other writers and creators who have not done as well with the legacy. But yes, it does allow you to diversify. It does allow you to take basically the brand and start fresh and give it a different character, same suit, and that can be effective if it's well written. It does allow you to increase diversity, so it is potentially very successful, but everything depends on execution.
Yeah, I've read legacy hero stories I really loved and legacy hero stories that make me want to go, did you ever read any of this character's early adventures? I mean, really, did you? But picking up on what David was saying about the legacies reverting, that kind of leads into something I wanted to talk about, because if you follow fandom news, you probably saw the articles about how some of the people in top DC management felt that having legacy characters like Dick and Wally and Donna and Roy in their 20s aged the main heroes to a level where it hurt their market appeal. And David's already said that he liked that 20s Titans, 30s Batman era, and I think I kind of did too. But Wayland, what do you think about that?
I think the big problem with legacy heroes that DC has backed themselves into isn't really so much the Justice League Teen Titans problem, but they seem to feel this perpetual need to do a new rank of younger heroes every few years, which should age everybody up, but they won't let that happen either. There have been now, 5 Robins? And I think 3 or 4 Wonder Girls? And it should have aged up both the League and the Titans, but they don't want to do that because they don't want to go away from the characters people love. So they backed themselves into a corner. And I think that's a big part of the reason why, when they did that, in my personal opinion, a horrible reboot several years ago, why they completely erased the Teen Titans for a time.
Yeah. Fraser, what do you think?
DC has some issues with age. There was a Justice Society series in the early 90s, which actually played them as, still more vigorous than normal, but as actual older people. Yep. And it was really charming, and they were getting some legacy heroes developing. That was where Jesse Quick first shows up.
Yep.
But apparently DC freaked out at them being so old and said, no, we are getting rid of this. Not good. Personally, I think age is just something to roll with. It has never really made sense at either DC or Marvel. If you try to deal with it, you'll just wander into a strange headspace and it will never make sense. So, fine. All the legacy heroes are now in their 20s, and somehow Superman and Batman are not old. Big whoop. Roll with it. But they won't do that. It's a gnat that they strain at passing, even though they will swallow many camels.
David, did you want to add anything?
Well, that was a great expression for one. But I think Wayland's got a really good point. And I was thinking about this as we were talking. The X-Men don't have this problem because it's a school. You have a new class every year. It makes more sense in that context when they're not taking on legacies. And I was just on the Gotham Outsiders podcast, and we were talking about Tim. Like, how old is Tim? Like, it's this weird nebulous thing because now Damian is getting older, and it creates this strange thing of how old is Bruce allowed to be. So yeah, I don't know. I think DC definitely has an age problem. I think at some point editorials should just put in some locks, right, and say you must write Bruce is 30, Dick is 23, right? Something along those lines. I also do think it's a mistake to always try to go to a younger market. Those of us who grew up with these characters, those of us who've loved these characters our whole lives, it's like, for me, Tim was my Robin, right? Tim was the Robin. I was there for Batman Year 3. I was there when he showed up, figuring out the identities from the beginning. It's weird because now I'm way older than Tim. And so I think there's some advantages sometimes to letting the characters mature a bit. So again, I think editorial just needs to be like, these are the locked ages of these characters.
We know the Romance Writers of America have a saying that I think kind of fits for me with some of these. It's like, who's your quote unquote book boyfriend? The character that you could be your book girlfriend if you're a guy, or either way, depending on who you personally are drawn to, which character. And for me, it was Dick Grayson in 80-Page Giants for a Quarter. When I was just learning to read comic books, I got a crush on Dick Grayson in 2 dimensions and 4 colors. And I have maintained this crush for all these years. And so naturally, Nightwing would be my favorite. And I think there is something to be said for the character that we glom onto early and maintaining a certain loyalty to that character. But the age thing, do you think it's just they don't have faith in people suspending their disbelief? I mean, Batman's still alive, for crying out loud. That would tend to indicate a certain suspension of disbelief.
Well, this week he's alive.
Well, this week, yeah. Maybe not next week, depending on what's coming up in the previews.
I think it's the same thing it is in Hollywood to some extent. Chasing the youth, if you've got the youth market coming in, then you're cool. If you're marketing to people our age, even though for most accounts we are a major demographic for superhero comics, then you are not cool. You are the old fossils company, and nobody wants to be that.
But you know, it's been amazing to me as my son was growing up to see the different entertainment options that he has that didn't exist when I was his age, like a Game Boy or a game console or all the social media stuff that kids do. And so I sort of sometimes wonder if chasing the youth audience, quote unquote, is kind of a fruitless pursuit because you've got so much competition. You're going to get some of them, but I'm not sure you're going to get them to the degree that you could when I was sitting around a small town in the summer with nothing to do. I don't know. But the Titans have come up, and I think we would all agree that they are the premier legacy hero group at DC. And DC doesn't seem to know what to do with them. Wayland mentioned earlier that they just erased them for a while. And so they've kind of gone from being an odd little book where they fought villains like Ding Dong Daddy and the Mad Mod to being the top of the DC sales pyramid to being, oh, we don't have it. No, we don't. Don't look at that corner over there. To now they've got a TV show, and now they're kind of in Nightwing for at least a while, and they've got a mini series, and they had a school. And so, where do you think that goes? Do you think it can go somewhere good, or do you think it's just a fresh stew of problems? Wayland, will you start?
Again, I think it comes down to what the writers and what editorial are going to decide to do with them. At the risk of harping on one of my most debated points again, during that wretched reboot, when they decided to undo so much of their history, and when the actual stated policy at one point was relationships are boring, which is why they got rid of all the marriages. And I really would have loved to see those guys explain it to their wives at dinner sometime, but that to one side. I think when they did that, they blew a big hole in things, and now they're sort of trying to figure out what they want to do. But as also with the other point I mentioned earlier, I think they're running into this wall of they've created so many new characters, new versions of the same identity, that there's a backlog now, and they don't quite know how to handle it. Because we've got Dick and Jason and Tim and Stephanie and Damian. And how many Robins is that? And how long have they all been trained for? And how does that actually make sense? And we've had, I mean, I've liked each individual one, but I think we've had, 3 or 4 Batgirls now?
Something like that.
So I think it depends on if they're going to try and make an actual policy about this, or if they'll go with what Fraser said and just go, look, this is the way it is. And there's 22 Robins and 67 Kid Flashes now, and that's just where we are.
Okay. Fraser, what about you?
What was the question again?
The Titans, with their checkered history, where do you think they go from here?
I honestly don't know. As someone said, well, DC does not seem to have a good idea about what to do with a lot of stuff. And yeah, the Titans had a really good run, and then near the end of the original Wolfman streak, it got very bad. And since then, outside of Dan Jurgens' attempt to do a completely new team, everyone seems to want to latch on and do a legacy version or revived version of the Wolfman Perez Titans, but it's hard to do anything new with them. So I have no idea what the thing to do is. But yeah, they have a great legacy. It would be good if DC could exploit it, but
not so far.
Not so far.
Wayland, sorry. David?
I thought the smartest thing they ever did was, as much as it made me sad, like what brought me back into reading Titans was when they killed Donna and split the legacy Titans into the Outsiders and into the Titans, and you had Cyborg and Beast Boy mentoring the younger ones, mentoring Tim and Connor, and then you also had Raven, who had been kind of reincarnated in a younger body, acting sort of as a bridge between the generations. I thought that older mentors, kind of like that GSA Infinity Inc. thing. I thought that worked really well in that period, as long as it held together tightly. I thought that was kind of smart. And I would love to see something like that. I also really enjoyed kind of what you saw with Batman 66 or Wonder Woman, in like that kind of era, and what similar to what Marvel's done with X-Men 97, I think was the name of it, where they essentially let older writers like Chris Claremont come back and continue stories as if it wouldn't be a bad thing. For a long time, DC, and I don't know if they still do, had like a line for younger readers and a line for other readers. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have 3 universes, younger readers, legacy readers, and then, kind of the current continuity. I think that would, that way they'd serve all their audiences. And they have so many different worlds as well. And in their, multiverse, it wouldn't be hard to, pick up and continue with one of those threads.
Yeah. We know so many of us started reading comics when we were in grade school or maybe a little older. And for a lot of us, that was in the era of the Comics Code Authority. So there was absolutely nothing in those books that was not appropriate for kids our age. And I sometimes think that's the time to get people, when you can suck them into it. And then as they get older, the books get darker, they're already reading. You don't have to pull them in. I don't know whether that would work or not, but like the Batman Adventures line was for younger readers, and it seemed to be pretty popular in the comic shops, but I don't know how it did overall. But as far as Titans, I mean, the TV show is a constant source of alternating delight and aggravation for me, because it has moments of brilliance, and then it has moments that strike me as so out of character or slowly paced or something like that, that watching it becomes laborious. And I think Joshua Orpin does a great job. I think Connor, I don't have any problem with Connor as a character, but I wanted a Titan show that had Aqualad, who did not behave in a stalkerish fashion and did not get killed by Deathstroke right off the bat, and Speedy and Kid Flash, as well as Dick and Donna, because those are my Titans. But it looked like what they were trying to do was meld in Young Justice with the Titans, like the Young Justice animated show with the Titans, and kind of get the crossover in the audiences there. So I don't really have a definite opinion as to what I think they should do. I just thought I'd throw it out there and see what everybody said, because it just seems like it's a great property that's just sitting there. And yeah, Fred, you want to say something?
I was going to say, I would imagine more kids, if they're coming through it through TV, they probably start with the Teen Titans Go cartoon, which of course will make the regular Titans look really strange by comparison, but it does have its charms. I really like Snarky Raven on the cartoon. Snarky, constantly pissed off Raven is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that makes me insane, because it happens all the time, it's in the comic books, it's on frickin' social media, it's everywhere, is that Corey has white eyes. Corey came into being in the Wolfman Perez era with solid green eyes. They didn't have pupils. They didn't have irises. They were solid green. They were not white. Yes, thank you. So that has really nothing to do with what we're talking about. But when the subject of Corey comes up and I think about her eyes, it's like my head wants to explode. So I just thought I would vent that a little bit to avoid explosion messing up the recording for everybody. So switching gears a little bit, what is the worst thing you think has been done with a legacy hero? Fraser, you want to start?
Well, let's see. There is the general effort to erase them and get rid of them in DC's 21st century. Wally in particular has suffered because Barry Allen's back as the Flash. They've got the Black New 52 Kid Flash, who is Kid Flash, so there's really no place for Wally, and they don't know what to do with him. Killing off the Stephanie Batgirl purely to get attention, which I think the writer pretty much admitted he just wanted to grab some eyeballs, even though she came back later, was very bad. My personal least favorite, the teenage Superboy clone from the 90s. He was a fun character. He was a clever idea in that he wasn't actually a clone. He was a human clone who'd been genetically engineered to telekinetically fake Superman's powers, which is a concept I love. And then Jeff Johns wants him to be half Luthor, half Superman, and all angsty over it. And so that's what we got. And I have never cottoned to the grim, gritty, angsty Connor. That would probably be the worst one for me.
Okay. David?
It's kind of like what Fraser's saying. I hate the bait and switch. I really was excited for Donna to be Wonder Woman. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. And then we get half an issue before Diana comes back and takes back on the tiara. It's like, I wanted to see Donna get to do that. I hated it when Stephanie was Robin for like half a second, right? And then Bruce fires her. Let's explore it if you're going to do it. I love Stephanie as Batgirl. I thought that was such a fantastic run. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed that run until I went back and reread it. So yeah, I think if you're going to have somebody take on a legacy, don't fake us out. And even if like the writer changes, that's probably my biggest problem at comics in general, is they're so short now, and you have a character introduced and developed, and just when they're starting to get interesting, the writer changes after 12 issues, and then they're just erased. They're just dropped out of, continuity completely. So I would love to see less of that, but especially the kind of bait and switch situation. It's just rude.
Okay. Wayland?
Cry for Justice. It's a very, very horrible series they did where they maimed Roy, they killed Leon. They tried to make everything, I don't know, it's an overused phrase, I guess, but as darker and grittier as they possibly could. And they did such a horrible disservice to so many characters. I thought that whole series was terrible, and especially what they did to Roy. And considering it was by James Robinson, who's usually a really good writer, I do not know what happened there.
Maybe it was the dreaded editorial intervening there. And of course, Leanne is back, but now she's a teenager. So we don't get that lovely dynamic with, Uncle Gilhead and Aunt Donna and all that. That was so much fun.
It really was.
Back in the day. I had mercifully...
love Roy being a dad.
What, David?
Sorry, I just have to say, I love that. I love when Leanne was a baby. But there was that horrible Outsiders moment where she was child trafficked. And it was highly implied that she had been sexually assaulted as a child, and I was like, I didn't need that. I liked Dad Roy, but I what Wayland's saying, don't grimdark everything. Sometimes you want some light for contrast.
Well, and she provided that, and she provided a lot of, well, not a lot of, but layers of depth for the character who is the famous bedhopper in the Titans. Now he's this dad with this darling little girl, and he's doing a great job, and they're all an extended family, and it was warm and fuzzy. And then to go from warm and fuzzy to grimdark is like, seriously? I don't know. I mean, we could do a whole panel on continuity and how a change in writer often produces a drastic change in character and world. And it really is kind of like sometimes they haven't read what came immediately before them.
I also think you have to be so careful if you cut out the heart, which is what that move is, where you take out, like if you killed the Kaylee in Firefly, if you cut out the character who is Sunshine and you can't come back from that. It's been the death of so many series and storylines.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I had mercifully forgotten about that storyline with Roy and Leanne, but I was gonna, what?
Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, it's a good point. It fit perfectly, but I was actually going to pick Heroes in Crisis and what that did to Wally.
That was terrible.
And then, you know, Barry Allen was the Flash when I started reading comic books. With Dick being a legacy character, that was just a bad idea.
Yes.
Anyway.
There was a 1990s Teen Titan issue. It was during Jan Jurgens' run, and Wally and all the original Titans get together, and Wally's talking about, yes, I made it. I'm finally in the Justice League, but I always thought you guys would be there with me. And they're talking about their different relationships with the mentors, and it was just really nice. And then they blew it.
Well, there seemed to be sort of a semi-implication at the end of Dark Crisis number 7 that the League as we know it was going to step back and some of the younger heroes would step up.
Yep.
But I don't think we know yet where that's going. If you could pick one legacy hero that you think is drastically underutilized and do something for them, which one would you pick and why? Wayland, do you want to start?
Roy Harper. Because he's one of the only ones who's never really had his own title. They've never been quite sure what to do with him. And by way of an interesting trivia point, we've had all these complex stories with the backgrounds of everybody else. Roy's parents have never appeared on panel, only in like a half silhouette of, okay, death by origin. We know nothing about his family. We know nothing about where he's coming from. I like that they gave him the updated version. They gave him the Navajo background, because that's as close as we're going to get to Native representation in most books, but that's a whole other panel. But yeah, do something with Roy. Let him be something useful and a good, capable person.
Okay. Fraser?
I'm going to pass on this one because my current comics reading is erratic enough. I don't really know who's being underutilized. So, as some of my friends will feel, oh no, that person's seen a lot of action, so I'm usually wrong.
Okay. David?
Man, this is a tough one. I would love to try to tackle the Gordian knot that is Donna Troy. That would be such an amazing writing adventure that I would fail at, because it, like you said, it's just such a complete disaster. I loved the Troya era. I thought that Wolfman and Perez solved it. I thought we should have stuck with that. That worked great. I'm going to go with Brainiac 5. And and Brainiac 5 counts as a legacy to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because again, we have Viral in the current timeline and then them in the future, or Invisible Kid, because he is not the first Invisible Kid. So I would love to play with the Legion, and I'd love to play with some of the legacy Quantum Girl, Quantum Kid. She, for example, like I'd love to play with some of the legacies in there. And so many of those characters were retconned out again in one of the Infinite Crises. I think it was Infinite Crisis. I can't remember, but I'd love to play with some of those legacies and do something cool with them.
Well, for me, it would be the original Aqualad, because they set him up with magical powers, and they gave him a new identity, Tempest, and a new pretty cool costume. And then the Wolfman Perez book died, and he vanished. And he's just been kind of shoved to the background in the recent Aquaman adaptations, kind of like Donna has been more or less shoved to the background in Wonder Woman. And it really wouldn't take much, a couple of things in a couple of panels to spotlight those characters, to make their fans feel like, yes, they're still aware this character is here and something good is going to happen. But I think it was in the Rick Grayson era where there was a panel in the Titans book right after Rick Grayson caused Nightwing to be removed from the book, and Miss Martian was in it. And Donna is carrying Garth, which for those who don't know is original Aqualad's name, down the street, and he's drunk, and she's carrying him over her shoulder. And I just thought, really, did we have to do this? Because I think he's a character with so much potential, and the Titans could use somebody who has magic. So I'd really love to see them use him. And yeah, Donna Troy is a whole panel all by herself. Yeah.
I would love to see somebody tackle Garth in a cool way. And I think one of the most interesting eras, again, having just reread Red Robin was when Bruce was dead, lost in time. I think this whole Dark Crisis thing of the original League being trapped in their pocket universes might not have been a bad idea to let that last for a couple of years and let Garth go looking for Arthur. Like you could do some really cool stuff with these legacies in those cases.
Well, and I'd like to see Garth and Calder come in a team up. I mean, I love Andy, but speaking of age differences, there's a little problem there. Because it would be kind of like it was a Western, The Sons of Katie Elder, and then it was remade as a modern movie where these 4 guys who had all been raised by the same foster mother were trying to figure out who had killed her.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing. These 2 young men who were tied into the Aqua family are going to go fix this. And I think that could be a lot of fun and have a lot of potential. But nobody really seems to be up for that at the moment. We kind of touched on this earlier, but some fans dismiss the Titans as a second-tier Justice League. Do you think that's the best they can do, or do you think they have more potential than that? Fraser, what about you?
Yes, I think they have more potential. I mean, I never felt reading the Wolfman Perez era that they were just being another Justice League. I couldn't have defined the difference other than the terrific storytelling, but they operated on their own. Or you could go back to the premise of the original 60s Titans, which was teenagers need help and they made themselves available. If teenagers need superheroes because they've discovered an alien invasion or a monster and the adults won't listen, the Teen Titans listen. So if you go with them as actual teen heroes, that would make sense. But yes, I think they can carve out their own. I do not think just because they are a superhero team does not mean they're automatically second-tier Justice League. But a lot of it's going to come down to the storytelling.
As it so often does.
Yes.
David, you want to add anything?
I think Fraser said it really well. I think they have their own niche. I think each team should have their niche. James Robinson, for that brief while in his Justice League, had Dick and Donna on the GL. And I don't know. I think the Titans, I think that Fraser's just hit it right on the head. Figure out what their function is, figure out what their purpose is, and then make that what the team does. And that would solve your continuity or conflicts. But no, I think they're amazing. And honestly, I like them a lot more too.
Wayland?
One of my favorite incarnations of Titans, aside from New Teen Titans, because that was such an amazing book, I think was in the late 90s. And what the concept of the book was, at least initially, was they took like the Fab Five of Dick and Donna and Wally and Gar and Roy, and each one brought in one hero that they wanted to help mentor and train. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. And I would love to see them do something like that. Not make them a school, not make them a wannabe for Xavier's Institute, but just they help some of the younger heroes get a more firm footing on what they're doing. Because one of the things that I think is an interesting concept that they don't touch on very much, the group like Dick and Donna and Wally and Roy there, they've been costumed heroes for a bigger proportion of their lives than the Justice League.
That's true.
I think, the whole 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon thing, you could definitely do that in the DC universe with Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
And I would love to see them tie on the networking and everybody knows this person, and give them more of a role in doing that sort of thing. I will go with Batman as the best detective in the DC universe, but I will continually argue that Nightwing is the best leader.
And Chuck Dixon had a good point. I thought Batman had to train himself and find mentors and learn everything. Dick got the benefits of all the concentrated training. He is probably better in his 20s than Batman was in his 20s.
Yep.
Yep. Well, there was I can't remember the title of I think it was a 2-issue story with the Justice League and the Titans, and they're suddenly marooned on this desolate place in this empty fortress. And then there's a clash about who should lead. And Dick and Aquaman kind of get into it. And Aquaman's like, well, I'm a king. And Wally's like, yeah, but he's a leader, kind of like that. And it kind of showcased the different dynamics of the groups, because the way it came across, at least in that, was that the Justice League was more of a top-down organization. Whoever's the leader of the Justice League at the moment, or who's in charge on this mission, well, what they say goes. Whereas with the Titans, it was more like, we're a family. You know, we hang out when we're not off fighting crime, and Dick is our leader because that's the way we roll, kind of thing. And so I thought that was an interesting contrast between the two groups, because you had a lot of the younger heroes with their mentors and predecessors discussing the differences between the two groups, in between trying to figure out what was going on and how they had gotten marooned here. And there have been a couple of times when the Justice League got mad at the Young Justice generation of Titans, and Nightwing and a couple of the others stepped in and went, look, you know, they'll come to you if they need help. Otherwise, stay out of their way. So it did kind of present an interesting dynamic and contrast between the groups. But then, as we've said with so much, it doesn't get picked up and carried on. It's like, well, that's this issue. A year from now, no one will remember it, kind of thing.
I think Dick is probably a better leader than Bruce, because Bruce spent his whole life training to be a lone wolf, and I have never bought the idea he is the master strategist who can organize an entire team, because that's not going to be something he studied. And Dick, I believe Dick is probably better at it. He works with the Titans. As you say, they are family, they are friends. He is probably better as a teammate and a team leader.
Well, I think it was in the Return of Donna Troy, where the Titans ended up out on this weird planetoid out in space with a bunch of the Greek gods, and they materialized there. And the first thing Dick says is, get me a sit rep. Not where are we, not what's going on, get me a sit rep, because that encompasses all of those other things if you get the sit rep in it. And I don't know if there are people at DC who don't like that because they think it shows up the marquee characters, or whether it's just one of those things that a writer comes along and goes, oh, well, this would be cool. I don't know why nobody's doing this. And they do it. And then their run is over and it vanishes, as unfortunately happens from time to time. If you were going to... No, strike that. Sorry, I had a question pop into my mind and then it popped out of my mind again, which is not helpful.
I can buy you a minute if you want.
No, thank you. Well, let's talk about a different group that kind of are legacy heroes and kind of aren't, depending on where you look at their origin story at any week in time. And that's the Legion of Superheroes, speaking of pocket universes. You know, for those who are not familiar with the history of the Legion, as I'm sure everyone on the panel is, but for those of you who are watching who are not, the Legion started out as having been inspired by Superboy. And then John Byrne retconned Superman's history, so Superman had never been Superboy. And the Legion ended up in a pocket universe, and then the pocket universe kind of went away. And then they decided for the Supergirl TV show that the Legion had been inspired, in fact, by Supergirl. And now, in the latest retcon of the Legion, they were inspired by the current Superman's son of Kal-El, John Kent. So are they legacy heroes, or are they just kind of piggybacked on there? Who's got an opinion?
I wouldn't count them. Oh, you go first.
We all do, apparently.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Long live the Legion.
Yes. I think they're the ultimate legacy because they were inspired and they picked it up. They don't have the same titles necessarily, but yeah, I think they're the ultimate legacy team. I love them to death. And I think they've been done dirty by all the retcons and messed up things. I love the Abnett and Lanning run because it divorced itself from a lot of the previous continuity in many ways. I thought it was really colorful. It was really fun. It brought in enough of the legacy elements, but it did new things. No, I love the Legion. I liked them partly because they were largely separated from the continuity of the greater DC universe. They could age, Earth gets destroyed, big things could happen without affecting anything going on in our timeline.
Yeah.
I love the Legion too. I wouldn't count them as legacies, so it's not a hill I die on, but they have had their own generation of legacies, new members, proteges of members come in over the years, and that's been cool. But eventually they suffered the death of 1,000 retcons, and even more than most DC continuity, theirs has been mangled, and it infuriates me.
Yeah. Wayland, you want to add anything?
One of my favorite incarnations of the Legion, and I think they've gotten away from this, unfortunately, but there was a good run for several years where one of the things that you gradually put together was R.J. Brand, the mysterious, incredibly rich guy who was funding the Legion, was Jean. It was Jean having survived up until that point, and he remembered the Justice League, and he knew they all needed that, and he slowly put together a more, at that, for them, modern version of the Justice League, and that became the Legion. And I loved that concept so much. And then otherwise they've been inspired by some individual characters or just the age of heroes, as I think what I saw last. I would absolutely say they are legacy characters, and I've really enjoyed most of the versions of the team.
Okay. Well, as you might be able to tell from what I led into this question with, I think they're legacy characters too, because I think if you don't have Superman or Superboy, you don't have the Legion. And I would sort of just as soon they stopped being retconned. As Fraser says, the death by 1,000 retcons, that's happening to a lot of characters anymore. And so, I don't know. As with so many things, I guess it probably depends how it's done, whether it's good or it's bad. But is there a retcon you think works really well, and why? Wayland?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure I can think of one. Actually, you know what? Let me amend that. At the end of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, when it was all one world that they eventually started calling Clutter Earth, when they brought everyone together and they'd always been on the same world, I really liked that. I liked that the JSA helped inspire the Justice League later. I liked that behind the scenes, Wildcat was one of the people who helped train Batman and Nightwing and Catwoman and Black Canary. That retcon I really enjoyed. There were so many possibilities they could have done with that world. Most of the ones since then, no, I don't believe I've enjoyed.
Okay. Fraser?
I would pick, I think the best one is the John Ostrander written Spectre of the 1990s. It takes the character and looks at all the different incarnations and asks the question, why is he destroying evil? It's not like he is going to get rid of it, no matter how many people he kills in grotesque ways. And he explores the why and the whereof and the reason. And it finally puts his mortal, and it gives a different origin for the Spectre, that he is an angel of justice who got out of hand, and he keeps being bound to mortal bodies who can control him for a while and stop him from killing too many people. And then eventually he runs wild. And at the end, his original host, Jim Corrigan, dies. And that led into him becoming a spirit of redemption hosted by Hal Jordan's ghost, which was kind of interesting, but that all went away. But the John Ostrander run was amazing, and it is criminal they've only reprinted about the first 20 issues in trade paperback. Well, that's DC for you. Their policies on what they reprint are also very screwed up.
David?
I have to comment on that because I loved that run, and I had the first issue with the glow-in-the-dark cover. It was so cool. And it was also just creepy and weird, and such a great use of Madame Xanadu. Loved, and her old ties to the Arthurian court and Merlin. Yeah, fantastic run. I got excited about that and kind of lost. I think the Crisis, I completely agree with Wayland. I thought especially the way they reintroduced Wonder Woman to it. George Perez did such an amazing feminist job with that. The way I loved that Diana was created from clay and imbued with spirits by the gods, that she wasn't. So probably that's my favorite. That worked, which leads to my least, which is that Diana is the daughter of Zeus. I hate that take. it removes the agency, it removes the feminism. I really can't stand that retcon. I loved Diana as the last spirit in the well of souls of women who died, and that the goddesses have been holding back to create the Amazons at the right time.
Well, my favorite retcon is actually Helena Wayne, because Helena Wayne didn't exist in the Golden Age. And then they went back and said, oh, by the way, Golden Age Batman and Golden Age Catwoman on Earth 2 or Earth 1, whichever it is, I always get those numbers confused.
Earth 2.
Thank you. Actually got together and actually had a daughter, and she became the Huntress, and she was really cool, and she kicked butt. And then they killed her in Crisis on Infinite Earths. And now the Huntress is back, and she's somebody else altogether. And while I think that character is fine, I don't really have an issue with that character. I just wish they'd called her something else, because
well, that's one of the messes DC has created for themselves. Because in the current DC universe, there is Helena Bertinelli, who's with Birds of Prey and is the daughter of gangsters. Helena Wayne from Earth 2 has been poking around on the same Earth, also as Huntress. And I think there's been another version. So at some point, it would be really nice if they could try and explain all of that mess, plus whatever version of her that was back in the Grayson comic. There's multiple Helenas running around right now, and I would really love to get that sorted out.
I think she's Bertinelli in the Grayson comic, but I'm not sure. Does anybody else remember?
I remember she was Helena Bertinelli, but there was some discussion like, no, we are not retconning Huntress, so I don't know what she turned out to be or what the connection was.
Well, there were even two Helena Bertinellis, because when the character first came back in the 90s with her own, unfortunately, brief run, she was a very different person than the Helena Bertinelli who was the child of gangsters. She was like a school teacher, and I don't remember what her inspiration was, but that was a completely different character than what she turned into. It was like a soft reboot. There was Huntress 2 and Huntress like 2.5.
She still had the mobster family, she was still getting family vengeance, but I loved the teacher angle, and her headquarters, she bought a whole block in Gotham of abandoned buildings so she could kind of camp out in the middle. I loved that run. She was really fantastic, and kind of the genesis into the Birds of Prey. Yeah, I liked that version of the Huntress the best. Sorry, Nancy.
That's okay. Everybody has their own opinion. That's one of the fun things about a panel. You find out that something maybe you really just can't stand it. And that's not how I feel about her, but there are things I feel that way about. And somebody else can show you what's good about it, why you should not maybe hate it quite so much as you do. Well, actually, we're running up on time. So is there anything that anybody wants to talk about that we haven't already touched on?
I will say the Starman, James Robinson did a Starman series focusing on the Golden Age Starman's son and working in every other version of every other superhero that had the Starman name. And it is an amazing legacy story and much, much better than when he was working on Cry for Justice. I don't know what happened to him, but it's definitely worth finding in trade paperback. It is amazing.
Okay.
I have them all in omnibus hardcover. I loved them that much.
Cool.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything?
Well, if you're going to talk about legacy heroes, I think, however you may feel about it, I don't think there's a way to not at least bring up the sadly just recently canceled Stargirl TV show. That whole show is legacy heroes.
Yeah.
And I love that they worked in a little bit about the Seven Soldiers of Victory, and they worked in a little bit about Mary the Gimmick Girl. And I really would have loved to see that last longer and maybe bring up some more legacies.
Yeah.
Well, that show seemed, well, at least among the comics fans I know, which is certainly a subset of all comic fans, that show was really popular, had a huge following.
Yeah, it was the victim of the CW's trying to sell, and so there's a whole Warner Brothers TV.
Yeah, the CW slaughterhouse. I don't know what they've got left for next season.
Superman and Lois coming back in March.
The Supernatural spinoff, the Walker Texas Ranger, and then there's a prequel to that now too. I don't know. I don't watch TV. I don't have time.
Yeah. Well, then if we're done, let's go around and tell the people where they can find information about you. If you've got something recent or upcoming you'd like to mention, this is the time. Wayland, we start?
Sure. I write under the name Wayland Smith. I've got books out on Amazon and other places. I'm not going to pitch any individual books because some of my stuff just recently got pulled when a publisher crashed. So I'm not quite sure what of mine you can find where right at the moment. My Wild Side books are still out there. I know that. And as I said, I review comic book TV shows and movies on comicbookclog.com. I didn't name the site. I just work there. You can find me on Twitter at Wayland Smith 1. And on Facebook, I am also Wayland Smith. If you find an avatar with a little German Shepherd head, that's me.
Okay. Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. You can find me at frasersherman.com. That's Fraser. And I've got lists of the stuff I have written, nonfiction and fiction up there. You can also find it on Amazon. And I also blog at Atomic Junk Shop.
Okay. David?
You can find me at davidslayton.com. All of my social media handles are in the upper right. And you can find all of my books really anywhere. If you go to Goodreads, you'll get a full list of titles of everything I have out or upcoming. And Dark Moon Shallow Sea, my first high fantasy, is up for pre-order. It literally hit the sites today. So,
Ooh.
And you can almost always find me here on ConTinual. My website is nancynorthcott.com. My next release is Warrior Mage, which is the 5th in my Light Mage Wars Paranormal Romance books. And next month, assuming everything goes well, which we all know it doesn't always, the 3rd volume of my Borking's Honor Historical Fantasy Trilogy will be out. I'd like to thank everybody who participated in the panel today. Thanks to everyone who's watching. And thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information, visit www.heroesonline.com.